Wednesday, we had that big push to the downside, down about 600 points. Going into the final hour or thereabouts into the markets, we had a Dow up 600 points. You had the NASDAQ that was running. It was up 225 points. Not a full recovery, but a pretty decent recovery there as well. And then suddenly in the last hour and a half or so, we started to see this sink come into the markets. They still finished, obviously, in positive territory, but up 600, we finished actually up 300 on the day. So only getting back about half of those losses from the previous session on Wednesday. The NASDAQ finished about 66 points higher. So again, pulling back significantly when you consider the fact that we were down about 355 points on Wednesday on the NASDAQ and a huge pull to the downside. We had a nice recovery out of the 10-year. You had Bitcoin up about 6%. We had volatility back down towards that, call it 28 to 30 sort of a range is where we seem to have been trading for most of the session. Now, always remember this, a 32 VIX correlates into a 2% move per day. And if we're getting that, then sounds great. Otherwise, we are a little bit inflated. So just keep an eye on those kinds of numbers and the kind of movements that we are seeing here on a percentage basis, not points. I'm talking percentage, and it will make some sense to you. And the VIX is oftentimes just a great indicator of exactly what some of the expectations are and what some of the trade that we've obviously seen coming into that. So speaking of restrictions, that is still overwhelmingly the story of the week. And it has taken over for sure over what we thought was going to be a week all about technology stocks. We've heard from Apple, we've heard from Microsoft, we've heard from Facebook, we've heard from so many, and yet that doesn't seem to be the story at all. As a matter of fact, not much of a deep dive into that story because of all of what's been going on with the short squeeze and with a number of these names, specifically obviously GameStop, but it's not just GameStop. There are a number of other names with very high short interest, and we are seeing the squeeze play put onto those as well. So the restrictions were put into place, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, Wall Street going after us once again. And quite honestly, you can't blame folks. It does seem like the rules suddenly get changed in mid-session. So that it just does not seem like that's the fair way to do this whole thing. So first of all, how on earth do we ever get to the point where we have stocks where you can have more of a short by double of the float of the stock? 200+% of the float was short in GameStop. And obviously, those are things that are going to be looked at. Those are some of the things that folks are going to have long conversations about. And we did hear a lot about the politicians, even finally, maybe there's a little bipartisanship going on there for that. Also, Robinhood announced that they are going to be placing restrictions on the buying for crypto securities as well. So that's just one more element that we are looking at right now in terms of all these changes that have happened in a very, very short period of time. And they did loosen up some of those restrictions. Matter of fact, that was announced last night for stock and options. And we'll see how that plays out. Although we are already watching to see how that plays out, because all you've got to do is look at some of these names that were shorts, and GameStop, AMC, Bed Bath Beyond, some of these various names. Certainly the beneficiary of some of that loosening up of some of those restrictions from yesterday. So started off today really fairly quiet, but with some pressure on the markets, down about 200 points. But given the fact of where we are in the markets right now, talking about the Dow, it's not a significant number that really does scare people all that much. Now, we did have a little bit of a recovery. We started to come back pretty nicely. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take a quick look. We're down about 165 points right now. And looking over at the NASDAQ was down 150. Now we're looking at a NASDAQ that's only down about 30 points. So certainly we have recovered off of the lows, at least to some degree. And specifically, we're talking about in the technology area. We're looking at volatility, of course, that's still hanging around this 31, 32 because of the kind of movements that we are seeing. And I'm talking about intraday movements like what we were just discussing, and some of those last final hour of the day of the session sort of moves. That certainly is something that has to be factored in when you're talking about this. So where are we seeing strength? We're seeing strength in a lot of those short names, but it's not just Bed Bath Beyond. We've got Novavax, which has a storyline with it, but also has a fairly significant short. Nothing like what we've been talking about with some of these others, but about 10% of those shares, and again, fits into the priority of, hey, how many shares are out there? Well, is there a small amount of shares? And certainly we are seeing a monstrous move out of that stock today. Moderna, American Airlines, U.S. Steel, some of those names, certainly some of the strength and some of the weakness coming from some of the biggest names, and that's why you're seeing the Dow being impacted the way it's been impacted today. We've got J&J, we've got Apple, we've got Microsoft, we got Disney, all in negative territory, so that pulling on the markets to some degree, obviously with the S&P, but specifically talking about the Dow. So biotech, pretty strong today. Semiconductors, overall, I'm looking around and I'm seeing quite a few names that look like they're performing pretty nicely today, at least so far. We'll see if that continues. So let's jump into some unusual, and then we got to jump out of here. I will be on the noon show today, the halftime show with Scott and the gang, and so we'll see what coverage we've got there. All kinds of different storylines that we can go with, whether it's earnings, whether it's some of these volumes. By the way, yesterday, I didn't even mention this, 50 million again. The day before, it was 60-plus million contracts. Yesterday, 50 million contracts. And let's just go through that real quick. Apple, almost 3 million contracts of that. I'm looking at Tesla with about 1 million contracts. I'm looking at American Airlines, 1 million contracts. Almost 2 million contracts, actually, as I'm looking at some of the, just an amazing number, absolutely amazing number. So unusual. Let's take a look at a couple of these interesting names, like a NIO, for instance. NIO trading around 60. I saw that it was already pulling back, but that was one of the first unusuals that we'd seen today. And they were buying 6,500 of next week's Friday. It's February 5th. Those are the expiring options of the 62 calls. They were going for a little bit of premium, cost about $2.25 all the way up to about $3. Probably a little bit cheaper as I've seen that stock start to pull back off of that 60 level, and it was getting closer towards 59. So that might be a little bit cheaper, but a pretty decent sized trade, 6,500 there certainly. Iron Mountain, that's a name that we've talked about, and it's been bandied about a little bit over the last few days as well. IRM, it's a REIT. It's got a little bit of a short interest there as well. Buyers of about 3,000 of the February 45 calls, so buying a little bit of time and certainly looking to upside because the stock was trading about $34.70. Those options, however, were about 15 cents up to about 50 cents. So from a risk-reward perspective, and a little bit more time than we're looking at in some of these other trades that have been just weekly trades, gives you a little bit more time into February for this one as well. Folks, have a great day of trading. Be smart, be careful, have an understanding. Knowledge is king, and the options markets are wonderful. Absolutely the greatest place in the world. Derivatives markets, you can control your risk, but you've got to have the knowledge to know how to do that the right way. Get educated, get an education wherever you can, but I highly recommend our guys because I think they're the very best, Market Rebellion. But you've got to be educated if you want to jump into this deep end of the pool because it is a little bit different and time frames obviously are limited. You are limited by where those strikes and where those time frames are set out, just like I was just discussing with the two unusuals we covered. I got two more at least coming on the halftime report as well. Have a great day at